Welcome to the Sri Lankan Understanding, a platform on which we explore the path taken by Sri Lanka, an island in the Indian Ocean. We look at the past, we look at the present, we look at the future and the potential and opportunity for this country in the years ahead. Our topic of conversation today is culture and its evolution in Sri Lanka. We are indeed honoured to have with us a renowned actor in this country, an award-winning actor who's got many Best Actor awards over the last several decades. He's also an academic, a very well-known theatre scholar in this country, Professor Saumya Liyanage. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on the Sri Lankan Understanding.
Thanks for having me, George. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I know you have a very tight schedule, but you've been able to make time for us. When we talk about culture, in a Sri Lankan context, what is culture?
It's a very complex notion, George. Very difficult to interpret and very difficult to pin down as well, because as many scholars say, it's a very notorious concept as well, the notion of culture. So I'm not here to give a particular interpretation of culture, but we all have different type of senses or different type of sense of what is culture, what culture is all about. So I would say culture is a kind of phenomena, and it is a way of living, a way of being actually. A way of being is a broader sort of analysis, I would say. It's a being, a kind of being, a kind of existence of human beings. So culture, for instance, the idea of culture was actually developed and theorized within the context of Eurocentric discourse actually, against the idea of savage. So the concept of culture is not derived from our native context at all. It is a concept that has been brought down here through different discursive, platforms. So now it's a very complex idea, at the same time very confusing idea within our own society. So people have different notions, different ideas about the concept of culture, and it is it's a structure of feeling for us, a structure of feeling. So I would say because of this feeling, the way that we feel things, it is very hard to articulate as well within the context of a particular language, because the language gives us different connotations, different meanings. So I would like to interpret this idea in this way, like it is a way of indwelling of human beings. So I am using this particular term indwelling, taking from a particular thought or particular philosophical thought, phenomenology. So in phenomenology, we use this idea of indwelling to discuss about how human beings engage with their environment, how they being in this world, basically. So it is a sort of indwelling. The culture is nothing but human beings indwelling and engaging with their environment. So because of it is a sort of indwelling, we have different sorts of feelings or moods, So for instance, human beings engage with their environment in different ways. We produce things, we change our environment, we build things, and we produce sometimes intangible things with our environment. So there are many ways that we engage with our environment, and as a result of that, there's a sense of culture emerges. So this is how I understand this, and yeah, still it is a complex network of ideas
that has gradually grown. If we look at the past, if we go back in time, maybe to even historic times, the kings, we've had a very rich, long period of history. When you look at culture having grown and evolved in that period, how do you see that having happened? We had so many kingdoms, we had various rulers. How did that evolve within that context? Wasn't it that much more complex given the diversity within the island?
Yeah, as we all know that we as a community, we have a long history, as we all know, and it is very diversified as well. It's very complex, very fragmentary, I would say. You know, the history is not a very linear narrative. It's very fragmentary and discursive as well. So there's no one single story behind all these things. There are many stories, many narratives, as well as very diverse discursive formations, I would say. So because of that, one problem here is, one problem that we have here is that we understand the notion of culture through certain structures that we have developed for the last 5, 6, 7 decades. For instance, George, now we have this Ministry of Cultural Affairs, we have Arts Council and similar other governing structures. They have their own mandates and interpretation of the notion of culture. For instance, the Ministry of Cultural Affairs in Sri Lanka, they articulate the notion of culture in different ways. Particularly for us, the culture is nothing but certain artifacts and certain historical materials that we gather. This idea actually, I think, has a sort of connection to the colonial context as well, because, you know, when we have these colonial structures in this country many decades back, centuries ago, there are certain remnants still remaining in this country, certain structures, governing bodies, and perhaps certain templates that they have left behind here. So we have taken all these structures as well as certain templates within which that we began to interpret and conceptualize our own ways of understanding, you know, culture and so on. So for instance, the culture is something, for us now, culture is something archival, you know, something solidified thing. It is an artifact. But we don't understand culture as a phenomenon evolving through time and space. And most of the things that we produce by indwelling in this world are intangible. They are intangible. So we can't touch them, we can't grab them. But still we produce a lot of intellectual, intangible materials in terms of culture. But they are not remaining here. They are ephemeral, they are vanishing, and they are dying as soon as we produce them. So what we have at the moment is the things that we produce and can be solidified as artifacts. So people tend to believe that the culture is this artifact, so the solidification, which is not. So people indwelling in this world, and because of, as a result of that, we develop certain artifacts, we produce things. At the same time, these things are tangible and intangible. So there are lots of things in the category of intangibility. But we don't understand that. And even now, here, we both produce culture. This is culture, the way of being here, way of talking, the way of using language, the way of having these attires, and all these buildings, structures, architecture, and everything. So all these things belongs to the idea of culture.
And that's where we've seen culture evolving. And I want to come,
Yes.
you touched on the colonial period,
Yeah.
and we'll come to that after the break when we return with the next segment of the Sri Lankan Understanding. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. We are in conversation with Professor Saumya Liyanage, and we are looking at culture and its evolution in Sri Lanka. Professor, you mentioned the colonial period. We've had 3 main colonizers who were in this country, and for whatever said and done, it has influenced language, it has influenced food, it has influenced attire, architecture, as you mentioned. All of this thing has been impacted by the periods of colonialism that we've had in this country. When you try to sum it up in a nutshell, what would you say was the main impact colonialism had on this country and its culture? Because we've had a cultural tradition for a long period of time. Sometimes we say we have a culture that is 2,500 years old. I guess that is not correct. We have a cultural tradition that is 2,500 years, which has grown.
Yeah.
For whatever said and done, you said sometimes it dies, sometimes it has ups and downs.
Yeah.
What impact did colonialism have there?
I think a great deal, because it is not only confined to our country. It's a phenomenon, spread in South America, Africa, and Asia as well. And so colonialism actually had many impacts upon certain key areas in countries like Sri Lanka. So they actually they interfered in trade and commerce and education, law and order, and governance basically. And they have, basically they have given us the idea of democracy as well. So now we have embraced so many things from colonial past, and I would say now there's no problem with having some elements or having embracing some of the materials they have left here. The problem is actually, there's a discussion and the criticism going on within the context of post-colonial politics and theories, like for instance the famous writer, Nobel Prize winning writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He decides to write in his own native language after a while, after writing his literary work in English for decades. Yes, there's a problem there. There are certain ways that the colonial minds have interpreted native lives and way of living. But there are other narratives and other stories that we can bring forward through using different perspectives, using different viewpoints. In that sense, we have a critique towards colonial period. But at the same time, we had certain, the colonial period impacted upon our lives, our way of behaving in this country, and at the same time politics and trade and commerce very seriously. So now the problem is we need to demarcate the difference between the anti-colonial mindset and the nationalistic sentiment. So it's a very blurred area at the moment. Both streams are overlapping sometimes. But the anti-colonial discourse is a different discourse from the nationalistic discourse. When I am criticizing the colonial influence or colonial impact in this country, I don't need to be necessarily nationalist. So I'm talking within a different context. So likewise, this discussion is going on, and it's a very complex discussion as well. And at the same time, we need to understand that colonialism is not over. It is taking place, it is happening, and it is happening in different planes. It is happening in different socio-economic and cultural planes in the world. That has been transformed into different, different forms as well. Now we have this neoliberal economic torrents coming into our regions in different ways, invading our lives and invading our livelihood. So in that sense, there's another colonial, domination taking place. So we need to understand that it is not just a story related to past, but a story that will be emerging in the near future as well.
We sometimes hear people say, make a statement where they say, oh, that is against our culture.
Yes.
And that is usually in reference to everything from food to traditions to norms to languages to customs, music, so many dance forms, so many things. What is your take on that?
Yes. No, this is a very popular notion, popular criticism, particularly in this country, because we have certain few ideas that we have solidified as culture, the notion of that has been developed through certain literary and political movements in this country. For instance, after 1950s, there was a nationalistic movement emerged, not only in the area of politics, but in literature as well, particularly Peradeni school, and led by Professor Sarachandra and others, and other literary figures who were vehemently, working and writing on nation and identity, politics, etc. So because of that, we tend to identify certain things as our own culture. For instance, if I am talking about theatre, if I am taking an example from theatre history, for instance, Maname o Singhabau, written and directed by Professor Sarachandra, people tend to think that Maname o Singhabau is our own cultural icons. But to me, it is not. It is a hybridization. It's a hybrid cultural phenomena. Maname or Singhabau certainly has got very significant, historical significance, and at the same time, it is a turning point in Sri Lankan theatre history, and to some extent, cultural renaissance. Yes, but it is not the iconic cultural symbol. Why I am saying this? Because the Singhabau or Maname has been produced through a diverse, using diverse materials, as well as after a complex, combination of diverse cultural materials, taking from different cultural contexts. For instance, from Tamil culture, from Sinhala Nadagam, and no Kabuki, and even Sanskrit theatre. So with all these insights, Professor Sarachandra managed to develop a particular artifact, particular piece of brilliant piece of theatre. It's a brilliant piece of theatre, brilliant piece of artwork. But it is a hybridization, a product of hybridity. So because of that, we cannot say that this is our cultural identity. This is not our cultural identity, but it is a part of our cultural history. And because of that, I can say that people have this criticism, very, very shallow criticism, that this is against our culture and this and that, which is problematic. You cannot say that, because we cannot say this is our, I mean, we cannot clearly identify what is the unique culture that we belong to. You know, even myself as a person, I have been developed through diverse cultural, economic and social context. So I am a hybridity.
Absolutely. And this is something that we need to understand and realize.
Yeah.
When we return on the next segment of the Sri Lankan Understanding, we're going to be looking at cultural sensitivity in this country. We'll return on the next segment of this program. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. Professor, you examined culture from a colonial perspective, how that has influenced us, how there's a misnomer in society about certain things being against culture. But when we look ahead, how culturally sensitive are we to deal with the evolution of culture, where we are going? Because there's going to be much change in the years ahead. Things that we might consider to be new today will become a norm tomorrow. It will become part of traditions.
Yeah.
How ready are we for that as a country?
I believe we have a long way to go, because we are not a nation which, you know, we are not very much ready to accept those drastic changes happening at the moment as well as in the future. So we need to be very much flexible and at the same time open-minded and forward-looking. So I believe that there will be many things happening in this country and even in this region in terms of culture, politics as well as economic planes. So there are things happening. You know, our environment is dramatically changing in terms of society, the way of living as well as architecture, and even our environment. You know, our seas and our rivers, our mountains are being changing, not only through natural evolution, but through our indwelling as well, as I mentioned earlier. The human indwelling and interfering is very intense at the moment. So we are dealing with lots of problems because of our interventions, human beings' intervention in this environment. So we try to change this environment drastically. So because of that, the impact will be very impactful. The impact will be very serious in the near future. Not only changing our environment and our climate and our rivers and seas, but our culture, way of being and way of living will be completely different in the near future. So we need to be very flexible to absorb all these things happening around.
I guess that's the most important thing, flexibility.
Flexibility and absorption.
Being able to understand that there is a huge array of opinions, perceptions out there.
Yes.
We may have a certain idea, we may have a certain way of comprehending a thing, but as you said, even when we look at history, there are various stories, there are various narratives that exist.
Yeah.
We've got to be large enough, understanding enough to know that there is a lot more than what is probably within our prism, what we see.
Yeah.
And I guess that is where that helps us understand, that makes us more sensitive to what is going on around us within the country, but certainly what is going on around us, around the world as well.
And further heightening our listening abilities to others, is paramount.
Absolutely. Going forward, these are some of the most critical areas, aspects that we as Sri Lankans, we like to use the word islanders sometimes.
Yeah.
It's maybe the island mentality also has an impact on what we are doing in the country. But we need to realize that adapting, I mean, Charles Darwin, I keep coming back to this quotation of his on many occasions now, where he said the species that survives, the species that evolves.
Yeah.
If we don't evolve, we're going to get stuck, we're going to die out.
Yeah.
Culture, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Our culture will keep evolving. Our interpretation of it, I guess, is what has to also evolve and change in the years ahead. Thank you very much, Professor, for taking time to speak to us, for giving us that very analytical overview of culture, how it was in the past, how it has evolved and grown, and how we need to be that much more sensitive in terms of the years ahead. So thank you once again for joining us on the Sri Lankan Understanding.
Thank you very much, George.
We've been focusing on culture and its evolution in this country and looking at the potential, looking at where we are going in the years ahead, how we have got to be that much more receptive to what is happening, comprehend it and face the challenges ahead. Join us on the next segment of the Sri Lankan Understanding when we explore another aspect of this country. We look at the past, we look at the present, and we look at the potential for the future.